How's it going, everyone? Sorry for Mother SpongeBob. That was today. It's June 24th, 2021, and today we're going to take a look at two tropical disturbances that are currently in the Atlantic. We have one that's approaching the Caribbean islands at this point, and another that just came off the western African coast and has the potential of developing into Tropical Storm Danny. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather content. Make sure to like if you like this video, and make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather content. So let's begin by taking a look at these two tropical disturbances. We have one, of course, that's approaching the Caribbean, but it's looking very weak at this point. It has a low chance of developing into a tropical depression or a tropical storm. However, this does have this tropical disturbance that just came off the western African coast has a higher chance of development, and you could probably tell by the amount of convection that's going on right with this tropical wave, where we do see those blowups of thunderstorms visible in the IR loop as of right now. So let's first focus on this investor over here, this tropical wave that's coming off the African coast, and you see that it's pretty far south, relatively far south from where we typically see tropical waves come off the African coast, where we see them a little bit further northward. This is a little bit further southward. However, it's eventually going to make its trek further northward as the week goes by, so there won't be any sort of this disturbance won't really feel any sort of effects from a lack of a Coriolis effect closer to the equator, since this will eventually move northward to begin its rotation, and has a better chance of rotation. But you see that there's a lot of thunderstorm activity, and it looks fairly strong for just a tropical wave. And if I were to show you this IR loop with no context, you would probably assume that it might be a tropical depression or a tropical storm. However, that isn't the case right now, and while it does look relatively healthy for just a tropical wave, there are some things that are inhibiting it from developing into a tropical depression or a tropical storm, and will likely inhibit it at least for the very near future. However, that chance will get higher as we head further and further into the week. In terms of the chance of development, the National Hurricane Center is giving this disturbance. We have over the next 48 hours, it has a low 20% chance of developing. So it's still possible, but the chances are slim over the next 48 hours. However, the chance does increase to a medium chance within through the next 5 days, where we do have a 40% chance of development within the next 5 days as we head further and further, as the storm heads further and further westward. And to see what's currently inhibiting it, we first need to take a look at the current wind shear map over the entire northern Atlantic, and you should see that while the wind shear isn't necessarily very strong over this storm as of right now, there's still just enough wind shear to really inhibit it from developing into a tropical depression or a tropical storms. And during the first stages of tropical cyclone development, that's typically the most critical that's currently the most critical time frame, because a storm that's very weak needs the least amount of wind shear as possible. And while the wind shear isn't that strong right now over this region, it's enough to at least slow down its development and keep it from developing into a tropical depression or a tropical storm in the near future. And another thing we need to also keep in mind, take into consideration, is the amount of dry air that's just to the north of this storm, because of course we're still in the very early months of the hurricane season. We're only in June, and typically during the earlier months of the hurricane season, we see a lot of Saharan desert air move into the Atlantic, and just a lot of dry air move into the main development region of the Atlantic, which inhibits tropical cyclone development, especially for low pressure systems or tropical waves coming off the African coast this early in the season, because there's just so much dry air over this region that it makes it difficult for tropical waves to develop in the main development region during the early months of the hurricane season, which includes the months of June and July. And while, again, there isn't a ton of dry air, it still could be enough to inhibit this from developing over the next 48 hours. However, the chance does increase later once the storm heads further westward. So if we were to take a look again at the wind shear map to see what will enhance the chance of development over the next 5 days, you're going to see that moving forward, the wind shear will still linger around this area, and it's as a result of a little bit of an upper level low that's centered just to the south of this tropical wave that's coming off the African coast, and it's bringing a decent amount of wind shear over the storm, which will inhibit tropical cyclone development in the near future. And we, of course, obviously have a upper level high that's located right around the Saharan desert region, which is also enhancing the wind shear in this region since an upper level low and this ridge or upper level ridge are relatively close to each other, so we're seeing those upper level winds a little bit stronger than usual in that area. However, once this storm moves further westward, we're going to see this upper level low sort of weaken, move more and more into the northwest to where it won't really be much in effect. It won't bring much wind shear to this storm anymore, and this upper level ridge will mainly stay over the same area, and this low pressure system will divert from this upper level low that's bringing the wind shear and this upper level high that's also enhancing the wind shear. So as a result, it might have an opportunity right here to develop where the wind shear is lighter than what it's currently experiencing right now, and that is the reason why the National Hurricane Center is forecasting a higher chance of development over as this disturbance moves further westward once the wind shear becomes lighter as the storm moves further westward. And taking a look at the humidity map, it's also very important to point out. So moving forward, you see that while there is going to be a decent amount of dry air to the north of it, it won't be like last week, I should say, where the dry air was completely swallowing up the main development region. And so as a result, this storm does have a better chance of developing than the first disturbance we've been talking about over the past several days. So as a result, this does have a pretty good chance of developing into at least a tropical depression or tropical storm later during the run. And while it is still a 40% chance, which some of you might consider that on the lower end, we have to keep in mind that that there is a possibility that as once we head more and more into the future, once the forecast range extends further and further westward, the National Hurricane Center and computer models might detect a more conducive environment closer to the Caribbean to where the development chance could increase. So while the chance is still on the lower end right now, it's and don't get me wrong, 40% I'd say is closer to the medium range and the lower end range when it comes to the chance of development. There's still that possibility the chance of the tropical cyclone formation could rise once the storm heads further westward, and the National Hurricane Center may detect area where the tropical cyclone development could be more conducive. So we just need to stay aware of this disturbance over the next several days. What will be key to its development is keeping track of this upper level low that's going to be just to the south of this storm to see if it's going to move fast into the northwest and not really and light in the wind shear dramatically for low pressure system, or will it move slowly and will it bring more wind shear to the low pressure system? We just have to wait and see, but the upper level low will be key in determining whether this storm develops or not. Another thing we need to keep in mind is the sea surface temperatures, because while it is on the warmer end right now, as the storm moves further northward, there's a chance that it could move into waters that aren't sufficient enough for tropical cyclone development. The darker red you see right here is at least between 80 and 85 degrees. If the storm moves just to the north of that range, then it could make tropical cyclone development less conducive. However, once the storm moves further westward away from this current, there it's gonna again move into warmer waters. So there is still that possibility that tropical cyclone development could increase as the storm moves further westward. So we just need to wait and see with what's gonna happen with this upper level low that's gonna be just south of the storm to see whether this will develop or not, and that'll be key. But I'd say for the Caribbean, you guys need to pay close attention to this because now the chances of Tropical Storm Danny are certainly increasing, and now we have a medium chance of development over the next 5 days. And I have the fear that it could increase if the National Hurricane Center detects a more conducive environment for tropical cyclone development beyond the 5 day mark. In terms of what the computer models are saying beyond 5 days, the good news is that they aren't really expecting this storm to develop much beyond the 5 day mark. How there is some, as you can see, there is some development just before it reaches the Caribbean islands, but then the GFS model quickly weakens it and doesn't really do much of anything with it over beyond the 5 day mark, which is certainly good news and something we want to see. And same goes for the European for the most part, where it isn't really showing much cyclonic vorticity. So here's a disturbance right now, and as you can see, as it moves further westward, there is a little bit more of cyclonic vorticity once just before it reaches the Caribbean islands, but it isn't a ton, which is showing that this the European isn't really lenient on developing this beyond the 5 day mark either, which is certainly good news. However, it could change depending on how things play out with this upper level low and the wind shear over this region. Since again, forecasting something 5 days out, there's still a lot of uncertainty, and I want to emphasize that as we're forecasting these tropical cyclones in the middle of the Atlantic. So certainly keep that in mind. And in the Caribbean, just stay aware of this, because even if this doesn't develop into Tropical Storm Danny, there's still a pretty high chance that you guys will experience heavy rain and potentially gusty winds out of this, even if this doesn't develop into tropical cyclone. So we need to keep a close eye on that. And another worry I want to point out is that now the sea surface temperatures are rising to the above average range. I know for a lot of May and even early June, most of the Atlantic was actually under below average sea surface temperatures, but now the temperatures have risen to an anomalous range into the above average range. So now it's more likely that we're going to see more tropical cyclone development this hurricane season than before, and these upper level the higher than average sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic will now enforce more lift in the atmosphere than what you typically see. So that's certainly something we need to pay close attention to for this hurricane season. And we could have a lot of early storms as a result of the higher than average sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic. But now let's take a look at the other tropical disturbance, which has a very low chance of developing at this point. As you can see, over the next 48 hours, chances are it only really has a low 10% chance of developing, and over the next 5 days, it has still only a 10% chance of developing. So it's nearly impossible that this will develop. However, you guys in the Caribbean islands still need to watch out for heavy rain and potentially flash flooding out of this, because even if this doesn't develop, there's still a lot of thunder showers associated with this disturbance. As you can see, while it doesn't look very organized, it's still more than capable of bringing heavy rain and thunderstorm activity throughout the Caribbean islands. So you guys need to pay close attention to that. But other than that, it shouldn't be much of a worry for you guys, which is certainly good news, as I think Tropical Storm Danny, or potential Tropical Storm Danny, could be a more concerning threat for you guys. So at least stay aware of this in the Caribbean islands, and maybe even beyond, maybe in the United States. Maybe at least be aware of this, because any storm that moves westward, you at least want to stay aware of this well before it happens, even if we don't know the full extent of the forecast. So at least be aware of this storm's existence. But yeah, guys, I thank you guys for watching this video. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather content. Make sure if you like this video, make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather content. I hope you guys have a good day.